Matthew Carter adjusted his tie nervously as he stood in the Grand Hall of the Galactic Union Summit. This was the first time humans had been invited to such an event, and Matthew, a mid-level diplomat, was here to represent Earth. Around him were representatives of alien species from across the galaxy, their appearances ranging from majestic to utterly bizarre. Despite the awe-inspiring sights, Matthew felt out of place. Humanity was still new to interstellar diplomacy, and he knew the others viewed them as inexperienced newcomers. "Keep calm," Matthew muttered to himself, taking a deep breath. "Just shake hands, smile, and don't say anything stupid." His chance came sooner than expected. As part of the introductions, he was brought face to face with Ambassador Veltra of the Zenari, one of the most advanced and enigmatic species present. Veltra was tall, with shimmering silver skin and piercing blue eyes that seemed to glow faintly. She wore an elegant robe adorned with intricate patterns, her every movement exuding confidence and grace. Matthew extended his hand, trying not to look too intimidated. "Ambassador Veltra, it's an honor to meet you." Veltra hesitated, her glowing eyes narrowing slightly as she looked at his outstretched hand. For a brief moment, Matthew wondered if he had committed a cultural faux pas. But then, with a slight tilt of her head, she reached out and clasped his hand in hers. Her touch was cool, her skin smooth like polished glass. The handshake lasted only a few seconds, but something unexpected happened. A faint glow radiated from their joined hands, and Veltra's expression changed instantly. Her composed demeanor shifted to one of alarm. Her eyes widened, and she gasped, pulling her hand back as if burned. "Ambassador, are you all right?" Matthew asked, stepping back in confusion. Veltra swayed on her feet, her glowing eyes flickering. Before anyone could react, she collapsed to the floor. The hall erupted into chaos. Zenari medics rushed forward, and other diplomats murmured in confusion and alarm. Matthew stood frozen, his hand still tingling from the strange sensation. One of the Zenari doctors turned to him, her voice urgent. "What did you do?" "I don't know," Matthew stammered, his heart racing. "We just shook hands." The doctor's expression darkened. "You've triggered a bonding protocol." Matthew blinked, utterly lost. "A what?" The doctor hesitated, clearly reluctant to explain. She leaned closer and said in a low, serious voice, "The Zenari reproduce through biochemical exchanges during physical contact. By touching her, you've initiated a genetic link. Ambassador Veltra is now pregnant." The words hit Matthew like a punch to the gut. He stared at the doctor, his mind struggling to comprehend. "That's not possible, is it?" Before he could process further, Veltra was carried away on a stretcher, her glowing eyes locking onto his one last time. They weren't filled with anger or fear, but something even more unsettling: confusion and vulnerability. Matthew's knees felt weak. "This is bad," he muttered to himself. "Really, really bad." Matthew Carter sat stiffly in a chair inside the Zenari medical ship. The sleek, metallic walls of the room shimmered faintly, a testament to the advanced technology of the Zenari. Despite the sterile elegance, Matthew felt like he was on trial. Across from him sat three Zenari officials, their glowing eyes watching him with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. He shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I already told you, I didn't mean for anything to happen. It was just a handshake." One of the officials, a tall male with silver skin that gleamed brighter than the others, leaned forward. "Human," he said, his voice smooth but firm, "you must understand the gravity of what has occurred. The Zenari bonding protocol is not something that happens randomly. It is a deeply sacred biological process." Matthew frowned. "I still don't get what this bonding protocol is. I didn't sign up for any of this." The official exchanged a glance with his colleagues before turning back to Matthew. "The Zenari reproduce through a biochemical reaction triggered by physical contact with a compatible partner. Your handshake with Ambassador Veltra activated this process." Matthew's jaw dropped. "So, you're saying I accidentally impregnated her?" The room fell silent. The officials stared at him, their glowing eyes unreadable. Finally, one of them nodded. That is correct. Matthew's head fell into his hands. Oh, this is just great. First, humanity gets invited to this fancy summit. And now I've gone, and this has got to be a nightmare. Before the officials could respond, the door slid open, and Ambassador Veltra entered the room. She was pale, well, paler than usual, and visibly tense. Her piercing blue eyes locked onto Matthew, making his stomach churn. She walked to the table and sat down across from him, her movements stiff. Ambassador, Matthew began, his voice shaky. Silence, she interrupted, her voice colder than the air in the room. Do you have any idea what you've done? Matthew gulped. It wasn't intentional, I swear. I didn't even know your people had bonding protocols. Veltra's expression softened slightly, though her frustration remained. Ignorance does not absolve you of responsibility. This child, our child, is a rarity. A hybrid between Zenari and human has never existed before. Matthew blinked, struggling to process her words. Wait, are you saying this has never happened before? She nodded. Never. The bonding protocol is sacred, a deeply personal act. For it to occur with a human is unprecedented. Matthew ran a hand through his hair, his mind spinning. So, what happens now? Do you need me to do something? Veltra hesitated, her composure faltering for the first time. By Zenari law, you are now responsible for the well-being of both me and the child. You will remain with us until the child is born. Matthew's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Wait, I have to stay here, like permanently. For now, Veltra said, standing. You are bound to us, Matthew Carter. Welcome to the consequences of your actions. As she left the room, Matthew slumped back in his chair. His diplomatic mission had just turned into something far more personal and far more complicated. Matthew Carter followed behind Ambassador Veltra through the pristine halls of the Zenari medical ship, his steps uncertain and his mind still reeling. Every surface of the ship gleamed with a soft, otherworldly light, and the faint hum of advanced technology filled the air. It was beautiful, alien, and utterly overwhelming. Veltra didn't speak as she led him to a private chamber. She walked with her usual grace, but Matthew noticed the stiffness in her movements and the tension in her shoulders. When they entered the room, she turned sharply to face him, her glowing eyes narrowing. You are now part of something that will change everything, she said, her voice cold but steady. The Zenari do not take lightly to outsiders interfering in our most sacred processes. Matthew raised his hands defensively. I didn't interfere with anything. It was a handshake. How was I supposed to know that's how your bonding thing works? Veltra sighed, the sharp edge in her gaze softening slightly. Intentional or not, it has happened. The child growing within me is a hybrid, a mix of Zenari and human DNA. Do you understand what that means? Not really, Matthew admitted, shrugging helplessly. I'm just a guy who was sent to shake hands and make small talk. Now I'm apparently a father to the first human-alien hybrid in history. It's a lot. Veltra folded her arms, studying him. A lot indeed. Our people are highly compatible biologically, but no Zenari has ever bonded with another species. This child will be scrutinized, perhaps even feared by both sides. Matthew frowned, leaning against the wall. So, you're saying this isn't just personal, it's political. Veltra nodded. Very much so. Already, there are voices among my people questioning whether this union is natural or dangerous. And your own kind, how will they react when they learn of this? Matthew grimaced. Probably not great. Humans aren't exactly the most open-minded species. For a moment, silence hung between them. Veltra looked at him, her expression unreadable. Despite my reservations, I must admit one thing. Your response to this has been surprising. Surprising how? Matthew asked, raising an eyebrow. You're frightened, uncertain, yet you remain, she said simply. Many in your position would have fled, leaving the consequences behind. Matthew let out a nervous chuckle. Don't give me too much credit. I have no idea what I'm doing. But if I've learned anything from my species' endless mistakes, it's that running away doesn't solve problems. Veltra's lips twitched, almost forming a smile. Perhaps there is more to humanity than I thought. Before Matthew could respond, an alarm blared through the ship, and a Zenari guard appeared at the door. Ambassador Veltra, there has been a security breach. We must move you both to a secure location. Veltra's eyes hardened, and Matthew felt a chill run down his spine. A breach? He asked. Who would want to attack us? Veltra glanced at him, her expression grim. Not everyone sees this child as a blessing. We're in more danger than I feared. The Zenari medical ship shook as the alarms blared, their high-pitched wail echoing through the corridors. Matthew's heart raced as Veltra turned sharply, her posture stiff with both authority and hidden concern. The Zenari guards at the door motioned for them to move quickly, urgency in their movements. Where are we going? Matthew asked, his voice tight with anxiety. To the secure chambers, Veltra replied coolly, her eyes scanning the room as if expecting the danger to reveal itself at any moment. We'll be safer there. Matthew had no choice but to follow her, his mind spinning. He had just discovered that he was somehow involved in a galactic event, one that had the potential to change the course of history. And now, their lives were under threat. He barely had time to process the gravity of his new role as a father, let alone what this attack meant. As they walked through the corridors, the air was thick with tension. The usual calm of the ship had been replaced with hurried footsteps and whispered orders. Guards positioned at each corner gave them wary glances, but it was clear that they didn't know who had initiated the threat. Do you think it's related to the child? Matthew asked, trying to keep his voice steady. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something bigger. Veltra's lips pressed into a thin line. It's very likely. The child, our child, is a symbol of something many factions do not understand or fear. A hybrid between our two species is unprecedented. Some may see it as a threat to the established balance. Balance, Matthew repeated, his confusion growing. What do you mean? Why would a child, our child, be a threat? Veltra glanced at him, her expression pained, because the child could bridge the gap between our two peoples, bringing about cooperation, or it could be used as a weapon, a symbol of power in the wrong hands. There are those who do not want that balance to shift. Matthew absorbed her words, his stomach sinking. He hadn't expected the birth of a child to have such weight, such political implications. The more he thought about it, the more it seemed like he was being dragged into something far larger than he could control. They reached a reinforced door, and a Zenari guard quickly input the security code. The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a small, well-protected room. Veltra motioned for Matthew to step inside first, her expression unreadable. As they entered, Veltra activated a control panel, locking down the room. We'll be safe here for now, she said, her voice low but determined. But we can't stay long. This will only escalate. Matthew nodded, his mind racing. How long do we have? Not long enough. Veltra replied. We need to prepare. I need to contact my people and find out who is behind this. And you need to make a choice. Matthew looked at her, confused. A choice. Whether you're ready to face what this child's existence means, not just for us, but for your people too. They will know. They will come for us, if they haven't already. Her words hung heavily in the air. The weight of his role in this situation, the unexpected father of a child that could change everything, was hitting him all at once. There was no going back now. Matthew paced the small, secure room, his thoughts a whirlwind. The alarms had stopped, but the tension remained thick in the air. He could feel the weight of Veltra's words hanging over him. The child, their child, had become a symbol, not just of their union, but of something far bigger. He had expected to be part of a diplomatic mission, not caught in the middle of galactic politics and power struggles. Veltra stood by the window, her glowing blue eyes fixed on something far beyond the ship's sleek walls. She was calm, but Matthew could see the faintest tension in her posture. He could only imagine the burden she carried. She wasn't just the ambassador of her people. She was now carrying something that could change the course of their future. "Why me?" Matthew asked, his voice breaking the silence. He had been turning the question over in his head since they had been locked in here. Why did this happen? Why did it have to be me? Veltra turned to face him, her expression soft but serious. "It was not planned," she said slowly. "The bonding protocol is rare, and most often it occurs within our species. But it has happened before, in times of peace, in times of great change. The genetic link is significant, and while it is difficult for both sides to understand, it is also a chance to change everything." Matthew stopped pacing and looked at her, confusion clouding his mind. "Change what? How can one child change everything? I'm just a guy who shook your hand." She shook her head, her eyes unwavering. "You are more than that now. This child, our child, is a sign that the barriers between our species can be broken. It represents the potential for unity, but it also represents fear. Fear from those who want to keep things as they are." Matthew ran a hand through his hair, frustration mounting. "So what happens now? You want me to just accept this? Be some political symbol, a father to an alien child? You're asking a lot from me." Veltra stepped closer, her presence both commanding and calming. "I know this is overwhelming, Matthew. I am not asking you to embrace it all right away. But the choice you make in the coming days will decide not only the future of our people, but of yours as well." Matthew felt his stomach tighten. The reality of the situation was settling in. He wasn't just caught in the middle of something. He was a key part of it. His actions, his decisions, would have consequences far beyond anything he had ever imagined. The door slid open suddenly, and a Zenari officer stepped inside, his expression tense. "Ambassador Veltra, we've received intelligence. The rogue faction has gathered at the outskirts of the system. They're moving quickly. They want the child." Matthew's heart raced. "What does that mean?" Veltra's eyes hardened. "It means we don't have much time. We need to leave immediately. You need to make your choice, Matthew. Are you ready to stand with us?" Matthew took a deep breath. The weight of it all pressed down on him, but something inside him clicked into place. He couldn't back down now. "I'm ready," he said, his voice steady. Veltra gave him a nod of approval. Then we moved forward. Together. The dim glow of the Zenari ship's corridor illuminated Matthew and Veltra as they hurried down the narrow hallway. The threat of the rogue faction loomed over them, the urgency in the officer's voice still echoing in Matthew's mind. They had no time to waste. The ship was already preparing to leave the station, its engines humming with power. Veltra moved quickly, her silver skin shimmering in the low light. She seemed focused, determined, but Matthew could sense the weight of everything on her shoulders. She was the ambassador, yes, but now she was also a mother. And that made everything more dangerous. "Where are we going?" Matthew asked, his voice tight with concern. He wasn't sure what he was more worried about, the fact that his life had changed forever, or the reality that they were about to run from those who saw their child as a threat. "Far enough from here to regroup," Veltra answered, not slowing her pace. "The rogue faction is not the only danger we face, but they're the most immediate. Once we're clear, we'll have to figure out how to protect the child." Matthew nodded, though he felt more helpless than ever. He wasn't a soldier, and he certainly wasn't a diplomat. He was just a man who had shaken an alien's hand, and now he was part of something far beyond his understanding. The ship's engines roared to life, and the gravity shifted as they lifted off the station. Matthew couldn't help but glance out a nearby window, watching as the stars stretched into streaks of light. He'd been a part of something monumental, but right now, it all felt like a blur. His thoughts kept returning to the child, his child. What kind of life would it have? Would it be accepted, or would it be a target for fear and hatred? "You're quiet," Velter said, breaking him from his thoughts. "I know this is a lot, but you've already made your choice." Matthew glanced at her. "I'm just trying to figure out what's next. I've never been in a situation like this before. It's not exactly easy to accept." Veltra stopped walking, her gaze softening. "I know, but you're not alone in this. We'll figure it out together." Matthew met her eyes, and for the first time since everything started, he felt a sense of clarity. They were in this together. The child they were protecting, the future they were trying to create, it was as much his as it was hers. "Thanks," he said quietly. Veltra gave him a small nod before turning to lead him down another hallway. "We'll reach a neutral zone soon. It's not safe yet, but we'll be able to think clearly there." Matthew followed her, his mind finally beginning to wrap around the idea that maybe there was hope. The war, the fears, the threats, they were all real, but they didn't have to define what came next. They could build something new, something better. The thought gave him strength. As the ship sailed through the stars, Matthew took a deep breath. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, he felt ready to face it. The stars outside the Zenari ship stretched into long trails as it cruised through the void of space. Matthew stood near a viewport, his hands resting on the cool glass. The vastness of space never ceased to amaze him, but now it felt like a heavy weight, an endless expanse that carried the uncertainty of his future. Veltra approached quietly, her soft footsteps barely making a sound on the ship's polished floors. She stood beside him, her gaze fixed on the same stars. The glow from her skin flickered as she looked down at the map on her datapad. "We're nearing the neutral zone," she said, her voice steady, but there was a hint of exhaustion behind it. Matthew nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. The past few days had been a blur of running, hiding, and making decisions he never thought he'd have to make. He had never imagined that a simple handshake would lead to all of this, being a father to an alien child, caught in a political storm, and fighting to protect something that could change the future of both Earth and the Zenari. Veltra's voice pulled him back to the present. "I know this isn't easy for you, Matthew, for either of us, but you must understand that the child we're carrying, it's not just our future, it's the future of our people." Matthew turned to look at her, his eyes filled with questions. "What does that mean, exactly? Why is this child so important?" She paused, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of determination and weariness. "The Zenari have always kept to ourselves. We are a proud species, and we do not easily mix with others. Our ways are ancient, and we have kept to those traditions for millennia. But this child, our child, could be a bridge between our worlds. It could create a future where our species work together, not against each other." Matthew felt a weight settle in his chest. He wasn't just a part of something personal anymore. He was part of a larger, more complex plan, a future that stretched far beyond his understanding. "What if it doesn't work?" he asked softly. "What if our people can't accept it?" Veltra's eyes softened, and she stepped closer to him. "We can't control what others think, but we can control what we do. This child represents hope, and hope is something worth fighting for." Matthew swallowed hard, the gravity of their situation weighing on him. He wasn't a hero. He was just a regular guy who happened to be at the right, or wrong, place at the right time. But now his actions would have consequences that reached far beyond him. They were silent for a long moment, watching the stars together. Finally, Matthew spoke. "I never asked for this," he said quietly. Veltra nodded. "Neither did I. But I'm here," he added, his voice firm with a quiet resolve. "I'm here, and I'll do whatever it takes to protect this child." A small smile touched Veltra's lips. "I'm glad you're with me, Matthew." The sound of the ship's engines hummed in the background, and for the first time in days, there was a sense of calm between them. It wasn't peace yet, but it was a start. They didn't know what the future held or how the rest of the galaxy would react, but they were no longer running. Together, they would face whatever came next. As the ship sped toward the neutral zone, Matthew took a deep breath. The future was uncertain, but he knew one thing: they would fight for it.